Good afternoon, everyone. It's Whiskey Wednesday, 5 o'clock New York time. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast.com studios in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Hope you've had a good week. For folks here in the States, it's back to work after a long holiday weekend, if you can even tell that it was a holiday weekend, since we've all supposedly been on lockdown, depending on where you live right now. Hope you and your family are healthy, and we're going to have some fun. We've got a jam-packed show for you this afternoon and evening, depending on where you are in the world. Later on, we'll be talking with John Glaser of Compass Box and Mark Reynier from Ireland's Waterford Whiskey. But I want to start off with the fact that this is the Islay Festival week now, and we've had a fun week of virtual events going on all over Islay and on the Scottish mainland as well. But we've got one coming up on Friday now. I want to bring in Billy Sinclair from Bunnahabhain Distillery because they've got their virtual Feis Ile celebration coming up on Friday. Billy, how are you guys doing on the island?
We're doing good, thanks, Mark. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Hope everybody's healthy there. I know that it's a sad week in a lot of ways because we couldn't be together on Islay this year, but how are you guys holding up at the distillery?
Doing okay so far. It's been a very strange last few weeks, I must admit. The distillery's been very quiet. Normally, this is one of the busiest times of the year for us here on Islay. But yeah, things are starting to tick over, and we're just trying to make the most of modern technology and embrace as many people as we can virtually as opposed to in reality.
So let's talk about this Feis Ile celebration on Friday. What all do you have planned?
We've got a series of little videos coming from the distillery at different times throughout the day, just sort of giving people a feel for what would normally be happening if Feis was actually taking place on site. And that leads up towards a tasting that we've got in the evening at 8 o'clock on Facebook. So we're doing a virtual masterclass on Facebook. There's Andrew Brown, the distillery manager, will be there. Julianne Fernandez, the master blender for Distell and for Bunnahabhain, will be there. And Steve Woodcock, who's the master distiller for Distell. So that covers Tobermory and Leitchig, Deanston, and ourselves. So we'll all be on the panel, and the masterclass will be hosted by Dave Broom.
Sounds like fun. I'm waiting to see if our pal Andy Watts from Distell shows up from South Africa. He tends to be a regular on these things. So what did you guys decide to do about your Feis bottling this year?
We did discuss that in terms of the appropriateness of having the bottling and with Feis not going ahead as we know it. But we've been talking to the Feis committee, the group of volunteers that actually organised the festival and all the events on the island. And what we did was we went ahead and released the standard bottles. I'm not so sure what the thing is in New York and other places, but in the UK there's a thing that the kids have been doing when they've not been at school. They've been putting little rainbows in the window of their house so that when they go out for a walk they can count all the rainbows, and it's a sign of hope and that the storm will pass. So on the two bottlings, we've got a little rainbow on the bottom of the bottle to signify that this is a little bit different and that there's a bit of hope for the future and things will get back to what becomes the new normal. So everything's still here, the people are still here, and we're looking forward to seeing you when we get back.
Tell us about the progress on the visitor center reconstruction, because I know the construction is still going on, right?
Almost. We had planned to open just before Christmas, but we've got this thing on Islay called Islay Time, which is a throwback to the old time of everything happens, but it happens a little bit slower. It's a little bit more laid back. And then we were getting all geared up to have the opening of the visitor centre, and coronavirus hit, and everything changed at that point. So the plans for Feis that would incorporate the new visitor centre and all the other bits and pieces were put on hold. So the visitor centre's there. It's very different from what you'd expect from previous trips to Bunnahabhain. It's a fantastic facility, and when you come down that long winding road to get to the distillery, it's a totally different world that you're going to experience. The whiskey will still be the same, the view will still be fantastic, and the same people will still be there to welcome you. You'll just have a little bit of a different experience, which makes the journey even more worthwhile.
What about the cottages along the beach that people used to be able to rent? Are those still going to be available, or did you have to take those out?
No, they're still here. We renovated 2 of them, and we're using them for the guys who are doing a lot of the renovations on site. They can stay there as a bunkhouse. and we're using them for staff coming over to help out with things like that. But in the longer term, that plan will be that those cottages will be renovated up to a good standard, and they'll be available to rent again as holiday accommodation on site.
Well, let's just give everybody one last bit about the Feis at Home on Friday. Where can people get more information?
Follow us on the website. It's on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all those sort of things. We've got two fantastic fresh releases, a 2010 Monya Amontillado. We've got a 2002 Madeira. There might be a little surprise or two happening during the masterclass, so you might want to tune in and just see what the guys have got up their sleeves. So that's 8 o'clock Islay time.
8 o'clock Islay time, which is 3 o'clock in the States on the East Coast, noon on Friday if you're on the U.S. West Coast, and probably the middle of the night if you're in Australia, which
Very
is
probably
is coming in from. So I want to bring in David Ligoff from Alchemist Events. Billy, thank you for joining us, and we will hope to see you on Islay again very soon. Thanks for taking a few minutes with us tonight. Please give everybody at Bunnahabhain.
Thanks for the invite, and stay safe, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you, Billy. So, David, let's talk about the Whisky Show in Melbourne that was scheduled for August. You had to make a decision this week, didn't you?
Yes, unfortunately, the COVID-19 fallout is going to continue well into that time period. Certainly, things are easing up in Australia, but the chances of us having mass gatherings is very unlikely. So we had to make the call that the same as we did with two previous shows, our American-style whiskey show in April and our main featured whiskey show over World Whiskey Day, we've had to cancel Melbourne as well.
And you're taking those virtual now. So explain the mechanics of putting a physical show into the virtual world.
Well, it's all been actually possible because of the app that we developed, the Whiskey List show app. We developed that last year, and it allows us to kind of replicate the show experience in people's homes. So it's not really just a whiskey tasting, it's a show experience where people get sent, well, dozens of these little sample bottles. Yes, I know what it looks like, but it has whiskey in it. And they can taste that at home. They can go into the app, find the whiskey, read about it, watch embedded videos, rate and score the whiskies, try them obviously, and then purchase the bottles if they want to. And we've done that for two shows so far. In total, we've had around 700 people across the two shows, American style and single malt shows that we've had over the last few weeks. And that's 28,000 of these little bottles that we had to fill and distribute. So quite a logistic exercise, but challenging for the first show because the Australian Postal Service was really bogged down because of the huge increase in demand and business because of everybody buying things online. But we think we've over that hump. They've added more resources, and we think the next few shows going forward will be a lot easier.
This is something you're thinking about continuing even after the pandemic ends and we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, though, right?
That's right, Mark. The feedback from our customers has been fantastic, and that as I always explain to people that yes, I like watching a music video, but I always like to go to the live concert as well. So we think that these shows, because Australia is a sparsely populated, vast country, a lot of people in the remote areas can't get to the physical shows anyway. So the feedback we've had from these guys is that really this is fantastic. We can experience whiskies that we can't normally get hold of before, and in the comfort of our homes. And we see different themes, smaller events, but certainly the virtual space is carrying on. And just a question there: the app is called the Whiskey List. It's both on Android and Apple stores, and that's something that we'll continue to develop and use.
And we just answered Matt's question. Thank you for beating me to the punch on that one. So when do you think you might be able to hold a physical show again, given the guidance that you're getting from the government?
We would like to think that by the end of the year, we could have small boutique shows with, say, 100 people. They're still keeping in place the 4-meter exclusion zone, so you need 400 square meters for 100 people, which really, there's no atmosphere at the shows. You know, the shows are all about camaraderie and large gatherings and cheek to jowl with whiskey lovers. But we are looking at some exclusive boutique shows that we can hold starting at the end of the year. But personally, I'm quite pessimistic that about getting shows back to the size that they were until vaccines are available. I think that's the key for us.
Well, as somebody points out, as Chris Ratliff pointed out from the UK, Islay to Australia is quite the shifted scale. We cover the whole world of whiskeys here on WhiskyCast, so that's not unusual. David, thank you for joining us. Please stay safe down there. I know that we were talking before, and you said that the casualty count, whatever you want to call it, from COVID-19 has not been large yet in Australia, and we sure hope it stays that way. But we know also that you're getting down to your winter time too, so let's hope that your folks all stay safe and healthy down in Australia, New Zealand, and we hope to get down there again and see you guys at some point.
Thanks, Mark. I look forward to being able to travel soon.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us. That's David Ligoff from Alchemist Events, and let me just take him out of the stream here. Well, it's been fun getting people to come on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast and our Happy Hour Friday webcast when we started these back at the end of March. And I put out the word that we were going to do these, and I said, who would you most like to see on the show? Who would you like us to get for guests? Well, it did not take long for a couple of names to come popping in. Mark Reynier and John Glaser. Mark, of course, is with Waterford Whiskey now, was very much involved, the managing director at Bruichladdich for years, and still lives on Islay, where he's joining us from right now. John Glaser is joining us from the States. We'll be heading back to London here very soon. Guys, how are you?
Yep, very good.
Very good, Mark.
And you, Mark?
Now,
can you hear me?
Tell us what's going on at Waterford, because you had to cancel your open day that was set for about a month or so ago.
Yeah. That was really very annoying because it was right on the cusp of our first bottling. And as you know, any distillery, that getting the thing going and the time and the effort and the trials and the tribulations, but just coming to our great moment, and we had the rug pulled from under our feet. So that was very annoying for morale more than anything else. So we had to postpone it to September, the beginning of September.
And how is this going to affect the release of your first whiskey when it comes out here in the next? Because I know you were about to release your first official, in addition to the open day release.
Yeah, they're being bottled next week. So they're just on their way to being bottled right now. So they should be done next week. That's three single farm origin bottlings, sort of stepping stones to our ultimate goal, which is will be released next year. So they'll be ready in the marketplace towards the end of June.
And I know that you have a U.S. importer from day one, pretty much. Our friend Raj Sabharwal from Glass Revolution told me today that he's going to be bringing your stuff in.
Yes, indeed, yes. So there's no escape, Mark. No escape.
John,
say again?
And Raj is on the chat room right now, so if anybody has questions about U.S. availability for these, they can ask them, and I'm sure Raj will be glad to answer.
I bet.
So, John, tell us what you've been up to the last few weeks.
Well, I want to ask Mark and Raj if I can get his whiskeys here at my mother's house in Georgia come June. That's the first thing I want to say.
I don't know if you could hear that, guys, but John was asking if you could arrange to get some whiskeys to John's mother's house in Georgia.
Which is that's where I am right now. Mark,
all right.
I have to say, Mark, I have sincerely really excited to taste the whiskeys. I've been following what you've been doing since you broke ground out there, and so yeah, it sounds really cool. And looking forward.
Well, yeah, it's exciting. It's for curious people like you, John. That's the thing. It's for curious people. People that want to know a little bit more, want to understand a little bit more. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah. Well, looks.
See if we can get a
Well,
look.
I'm in Georgia, which is why I'm joking. I'll buy the whiskeys in London. Hopefully, we can find them there. But yeah, that's where I've been since March. So I came over on a trip to visit some cooperages that we work with and a couple distilleries, and then I stopped at my mom's house on the way back to London for what was meant to be 2 days, turned into 80 days. I came down with a fever and a cough. But I'm fine now.
A lot of that going around these days.
A lot of that going around, yeah, exactly.
So you actually released a whiskey in the middle of all this that did not get a lot of attention, but tell us about it.
Well, yeah, we released a limited edition, the first of what'll be 2 20th anniversary limited editions for us, called Rogue's Banquet. And when I say release it, we let it. We've been working on it obviously for better part of a year, and it was planned to be released in March. And then of course, things happened in March, and we just thought that the idea of making a lot of noise about a new expensive whiskey wasn't appropriate at that time. So we had distributors who wanted to order it, and we let them order it. We didn't do any press releases or any stuff online, no social media about it whatsoever. We just let it kind of naturally work its way into the market. It just didn't seem right to do more than that.
So tell us what went into it. I'm assuming there's some Kleinleich in there, knowing you.
Rogue's Banquet is, the idea behind it and the name is there are some whiskeys, and I know Mark Reynier knows all about this, that contain they have certain decadent flavors that conjure up images of foods and feasts and things like that. And the whiskeys we put together for this, we're doing that for myself and James, and we were working it up. And it's built around an old parcel of malt whiskey from Milton Duff Distillery. Older than 19 years old is all I can tell you, because of the laws on such things, but considerably older. And then it's buttressed with a touch of Kleinleich and some very old grain whiskey from the North British Distillery as well.
John, we are having a little trouble hearing you. Can you please bring your microphone in a little closer?
Sure. Is that working better?
That works much better. Yeah, it's just a little far away.
Yeah.
So,
did you get that answer to that question?
No. Why don't you go ahead and repeat a little bit of it, just because I'm
sure it was built around an old parcel of malt
whiskey
from the Milton Duff Distillery, well over 19 years old, which is the youngest component in this recipe. Yes, a dash of Kleinleich, as we love to use that for everything that it contributes, but just only about 3-4% Kleinleich. It was about just under 70% of Milton Duff, but also all sort of buttressed and sweetened by some very old grain whiskey from the North British Distillery. So technically, it's a blended Scotch whiskey, but we don't think in categories. We just think in terms of flavor.
I also understand you're bringing back. I'm looking across at the empty bottle now of. The first bottling that you did for a retailer specifically, the original Magic cask for the LCBO,
right? That
I had you sign for me, something like 2007. I hear tell that the name may be coming back next year.
Yeah, well, we haven't. We've pushed that into the future, given everything going on. So that will be 2021 at some point. We always love that idea about when you're creating a blend of casks, there's one cask in particular that's extraordinary and with really compelling, unusual characteristics, and then you build around that. And that was the idea with the original Magic cask all those years ago, which we sent to the LCBO in Ontario. And it's the same idea for this whiskey, although a very different style is what it ended up being.
Just a reminder, if you're watching us online, feel free to ask your questions in the chat room. Just the standard reminder, if you're watching on Twitter, don't reply to the posting with the video in it, because we won't see that till after the show. It doesn't feed into the chat windows here. It'll feed in if you're watching on Periscope, but not on Twitter. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, we can see your comments along with Periscope, and we'd love to get your questions. We have questions coming in for both Mark and John. But Mark, let's start with you, because we haven't really talked much since you opened the distillery in 2015, because you've been waiting until just about now to get the whiskeys out. Tell us about the projects that you've been doing with all the farmers about doing single estate whiskeys with these guys, with
Yeah.
keeping all the barley separate.
Well, it's the whole fundamental concept of the project. We started on the premise that barley is what we want to put the concentration on, and we had the ability, the chance to create the logistics right from day one that allowed us to use 40 different farms in the locale and keep each farm's barley separate, right from the field through to malting, mashing, distilling, barrel, and ultimately bottle. And it sounds quite a straightforward thing to do, but there's a huge logistics that goes behind it, and with some very good partners, Minch Malt for the barley malting, and the Dalton brothers. We built this cathedral, we call it the Cathedral of Barley. So it's dedicated, it's binned up to take 120, 130 tons from each farm, 40 of them side by side in perfect conditions. And that's really the start of our project. That's where everything starts from there. And what I was saying to John is that it's about the curiosity of we know what happens with barley, how it grows, where it grows, things we started at Bruichladdich and were really intrigued by, but I was never able to do comprehensively for a number of reasons. But here with Waterford, we've been able to start right from day one with this principle of barley being king. It's all about the barley forward, terroir driven, and it's whether you can see those differences when you come through to the spirit. Now we experimented at Bruichladdich. We were able to demonstrate that this was realistic. We weren't able to prove anything. We didn't have the logistics in place, but now we can. And in fact, we've taken it a step further and actually commissioned the first ever terroir proving study, because we were not stupid. We know there's a lot of people out there. Oh no, there's no such thing. You can't have terroir with whiskey. Barley is barley. Distillation is so aggressive it destroys any differences. We've heard all that bollocks before, and so we took the decision to try and prove scientifically once and for all what the French have known for generations, for centuries, that terroir exists, and it exists for the vine as much as it does for any other cereal, and obviously in our case barley, which is where all that flavor, that whiskey flavor, comes from. And those results will be published. Well, again, COVID-19. There were going to be initial results were going to be presented at the Distillers Conference, World Distillers Conference in Edinburgh in May, but that got cancelled. But the paper with the Institute of Brewing and Distilling will be presented before Christmas. And I'm pleased to say that exactly what we've said is demonstrable, both through taste and scientific analysis, and for the first time bringing those two things together, so we can both show you and you can taste the differences. They're subtle differences, but there's certain things that we've learned along the way. One is that the variety doesn't make much difference. Because most of the modern varieties we're using now are all propagated from the same varieties from the early 60s, and so are genetically too close together, and they were developed for yield and disease resistance rather than flavor. But what we can prove is that the different soil structures and the terroirs, the environments, the topography, the microclimates influence those flavors over, and we've been able to do it with over 3 years. we wanted to do it, comprehensively. So we've had to wait until we've got the third year's data in. And it's a combination of Dr. Dustin Hurd from the Oregon State University. It's the guys at Cork University with their the latest mass spectron gas chromatography machines. The Irish Ministry of Agriculture, Chagas, Dr. Harry Rifkind in Scotland, Minch Malt. There's a whole load of people that have come together to make this happen. And I think it will startle quite a few people. There'll be a lot of surprises in the industry out there. The naysayers, see no evil, evil, hear no evil. Those guys can't bury their heads any longer. Whether you like the whiskies or not is a different ballgame. We're not going to force feed anybody. But the differences are there. They're demonstrable and they're provable. On a basic level, what we've discovered is sandy soils produce a predominantly fruit-driven aspect. Clay alluvial soils produce a multi-year flavor profile. And to complete that, the limestone-derived soils, limestone loams, tend to produce a more spicy flavor profile. So this is what we're observing at the moment. That's a very basic general breakdown of terroir and flavor. But all this will become clear.
We'll get back to it in a second. We've got a good question for John now from Chris Ratcliffe. How do you come up with a whiskey concept? Do you have a flavor or idea in mind and then find the whiskeys? Or do you start with the parcels of whiskey that you get in and see what inspires you from those? How do you decide when you're coming up with new product development?
Well, there's no set way to do it, really. Sometimes we're inspired by parcels of whiskey. Sometimes we're inspired by surprise combinations and trying to do something else. And then we put the idea, the concept, the story behind the whiskey, and then the name come from that. Sometimes we have these names that kick around for a long time, and I keep these lists of names for years, and then sometimes you come across a whiskey idea that fits a name that you've already had, and then Flaming Heart is the best example of that. That was a name that was just kicking around, inspired by an old M. Ward song for years, and until we developed this idea about combining malt whiskeys finished in French oak with all the spice character that they lended the malt whiskey, and combining that with heavy peated whiskeys. We had this like sweet and smoky thing going on, and we thought Flaming Heart was a fitting name. So there's no really set way. It can happen in any number of ways they can come about.
So do you think of a name first and then try and make a whiskey to it? Or
No.
does that ever happen?
Usually it's the other way around. Usually it's the whiskey first, and the name comes from that. But as I say, you never know where inspiration is going to come from. Can I ask Mark a question? Is that fair? Mark,
of course, by all means.
So, Mark, maybe Gillespie was going to get to this end. What are you doing with wood, and what are you filling into?
All right, yeah. Well, as you know, I think I'm a great believer in good quality wood, and so what we've done is each farm, which is roughly 200 barrels a time, goes into the same proportions of wood, and that's partly to give us, operational sort of movability. But each farm is therefore in its own right a single bottling if we want it to be. So there's 15% virgin American, 15% virgin French, and then roughly 30% first fill American, 30% first fill French. And then some what we call VDN, Vin Doux Naturel, sort of fortified wine casks. which wood-wise they're American oak, but fortified, whether it's sherry or Moree or Banyuls or reef salt or port, Madeira, those sort of barrels. I mean, but basically to give us color, sweetness. So each one we can maneuver within each farm to create different styles if we want to do it. The first three bottlings they're identical, deliberately identical. So the only difference is the terroir. It's the same varieties of barley, the same harvest, same distillation profile. I mean, done that deliberately. Just here you are. Here's three different terroirs. But going forward with all these computations and permutations that we have, it's a dream for someone like you that enjoys playing with the different components. Because it's endless. It's all Waterford whiskey. It's all Waterford single malt. But my word, we can cut it lots of different ways, and we've only just started. So Ned is having a field day. First of all, is obviously when you start a new distillery, you've got to work out what your house style is. What is Waterford whiskey? What are you? Before you start playing with all the different options that you can. Most people can play with wood retrospectively, finishing, as you say. But when you start, full-term maturations, and you've got the chance to have unparalleled wood policy, we've made it what we wanted to be. We haven't had to shoehorn it into a budget or anything. This is what we wanted to do. It's very rewarding, and as you know, from wading through barrels and barrels and barrels of whiskey, you've got good barrels, you've got bad barrels, you've got ordinary barrels, dull barrels, inspiring barrels. But that's in the days when people didn't really care about the wood, and there was a lot of recycling going on. So when you actually have the chance to start, with your perfect wood policy, it's very rewarding, very inspiring, because it gives you all this, all these sweeties to play with.
We do have a quick question here from Greg in Paris. We've seen a lot of whiskeys out of Ireland that have been making a big deal about being finished in Irish oak. Are you going to do anything with that at Waterford?
No. Next question.
Okay, next question. Will there be a fan program for the Waterford whiskies similar to what Buffalo Trace did with its single oak project, where people can taste the differences back to back between the different farms?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean that's why we're doing three to start with. So they will be available to compare and contrast, and the data for each one will be provided. So the full data. I mean, the inside leg measurement of the farmer. The full data. So you can see that when we say they are the same in distillation, they are the same in temperatures. The whole thing is there for you to compare, because of course we know, and we know the tricks that go on in this industry, where people say, oh yeah, look at the difference, and they've been deliberately made to be different. Well, we're not playing that game. Transparency is key to all this. We know the charge will be that from the cynics and the naysayers. They would say that, wouldn't they? Well, we've set this out to be totally and utterly transparent. We want to share it. We want people to see. We've had great fun doing this. We are having great fun doing this. And we welcome like-minded folk, John, like-minded folk to come and take part and enjoy it and see what it's all about. It's been the most fantastically inspirational experience to work with these guys and to share this with them and discover it together. And we are discovering, it's not finished, it's not over. These are the first. We couldn't help ourselves. We had to share. But it's, as I said, these are stepping stones. This is not the final goal. The final goal is further down the line. These are components, and each with its own identity. And then we're going to put them together, stack them, flavor profile on flavor profile, all with the Waterford DNA, but providing those layers and layers and layers of nuances of flavor. The idea being to make the most compelling single malt whiskey there's ever been. Hopefully it'll be the best, but it may not be, but it will certainly be the most compelling. And the most profound. That's the goal. It's inspired by my career in the wine trade, where a lot of my inspiration comes from. Half my career has been in the wine trade. This year, exactly half, 20 years, and 20 years in the whiskey world. So I've owned a vineyard. I've made wine. I've picked grapes. I've bottled it. I've labeled it, I've shipped it, I've imported it, distributed it, wholesaled it, retailed it. And then to mirror that, I've retailed whiskey, wholesaled whiskey, bottled whiskey, distilled whiskey, grown the barley. So I've done the whole range from one extreme to the other. And I think that gives you a viewpoint of this industry, which is very different, because you've had these different experiences, not just selling, but from manufacture, from vineyard to barley field and everything in between. So I think that gives you a different position to look at these things. And I think the wine side, the wine world has a very different attitude to the whiskey world. I mean, when you made that crossover, it was like going from the dark to the light to the dark side. And, we want to shine light in there, shine light as to what you can do with this national drink of ours, and share it with like-minded folk that are curious, that just want to know what happens if, because that's what Waterford's been about. What happens if? And it's been great fun, and we're looking forward to sharing it with people.
And we have this comment that I've been waiting to get a word in edgewise here from you, Mark.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I'm kidding. But could there possibly be a collaboration project between Mark and John? I've never done anything outside of...
Why not, John? Why not?
Well, in a sense, there already has been, actually. Mark, you talking about your career in wine, because when I started Compass Box in 2000, 20 years ago, and I had one bottling, the original Hedonism grain whiskey bottling under my belt.
Yeah, I remember
I was carrying in a rucksack around London, and Mark back when Mark had a wine shop in London, I sold him the very first batch of Hedonism. So that's a collaboration. I agree with you, Mark. In that there's so much to be inspired by when we look at the wine business, because you might remember, I came from the wine trade as well. When I got out of university, I wanted to be a winemaker, and I followed that trail for many years. And I worked in retail, and I worked in wholesale, and I went to France and spent a better part of a year in vineyards, and went back to two harvests, went to California, Napa.
Well, there you go.
And that was my intention. But then I got into the business side of things, and then into whiskey eventually, and then Compass Box. But
well, you don't know where you're going to end up. You're right. There's but I think my general feeling is there isn't the same cynicism in the wine trade. The wine trade is a lot sort of it's smaller people, it's smaller companies, it's driven people, it's inspired people, it's people that get their hands dirty, people that get involved. The whiskey industry is so vastly concentrated in the hands of some very, very powerful companies. It's just a different ballgame,
And I agree with that. But when you look back at the 20 years since, well, both you and I roughly got into the whiskey business side of things from wine, it has changed so much. It has changed so much.
Sure.
Now, so many smaller players in whiskey, particularly over here in America. And I'm so pleased in Scotland and Ireland.
Yes, you're right.
and even in Wales, to see, small businesses and entrepreneurs and people with their own personal vision trying to make whiskey. And it's happening all over the world, as we know. So it has changed. It has changed. Still a large concentration.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
It has changed. And a lot of it inspired by wine, as you and I have been.
You two have also been leaders in, well, Mark mentioned transparency, the whole transparency movement in whiskeys over the last 5 to 10 years. You both have had more than your share of run-ins with the various trade associations over the years.
Yeah.
You've managed to make people mad in 2 countries now.
About to do 3.
Everywhere you go. I can't wait to see what the folks in Grenada do with your rum distillery.
Oh God, yes.
So,
I don't know what the point of your question is there. Am I just happy causing trouble? Well,
No,
I think there's.
I was just going to say, transparency for me is inspired very much by the world of wine.
Yeah.
And I very often use, Josh Jensen at Calera. Wine,
Oh yeah, great wines, Pinot Noir,
fantastic wines. And you look at his back labels, and that was always an inspiration for me back when I was in the wine business. Every vineyard, down to a 1 decimal point in terms of percentage of every vineyard in his blend, and that kind of transparency inspired me when I started Compass Box.
Can you
How
see
is Josh?
in 10, 15 years maybe when we might actually be allowed to be more transparent on whiskey labels, where it might actually come to pass?
Well, I think.
I've been having run-ins with the Irish label authorities, which I think after the SWA, which as you know, both a lobbying body and a regulator. I mean, there's no such correlation at the moment in Ireland, and trying to get label approval has been an absolute joke. It's been absolutely hysterical because you're dealing with bureaucrats that have a series of regulations in front of them, and they interpret a comma this way and a comma that way. They don't really get the bigger picture, and the frustration in trying to get organic labels done, and the statements you're making, which are bleeding obvious, but they don't fit into the original technical file because no one thought about organic whiskey at the time. So you're in this sort of catch-22 of bureaucratic rabbit holes. It's hysterical. But I think in general, the SWA. I never thought I would sort of stand up for the SWA, but Christ, they need one in Ireland, somewhat desperately. But so I think transparency is the sort of sword of truth that we can play. Small people can play. But there's a lot of people that, as we know, like to swing on the coattails of these sort of things, and they don't, they like to use the terminology, but they don't actually do the deal. And that's what I think is slightly difficult when you're dealing with these generic terms like terroir. We know there's people that are traducing the concept because they either just deliberately don't understand it, or it's done to undermine what it means. But one way or another, it's going to get abused. It's just like casks and oaks and finishes got abused. There's a lot of people that will swing on coattails, and I think terms like transparency and traceability. Well, what's it mean to you? I know what it means to me. And they mean a great deal. We had that Waterford equation, which is that real provenance equals terroir plus traceability over transparency. You can't have provenance without a terroir, and you can't have a terroir without proving it, which is traceability. And there's no point having it if you can't demonstrate it and show it. So to me, they all go together, hand in hand. But any of these buzzwords quickly become devalued in the hands of people that can see a quick buck. They can talk the talk, but not actually change what they do. And then that's the point. So I think transparency is very important to us, that you can shine a light on it, you can prove what you're doing, and by proving it, you got to show it.
Mark, I need to get you on a conversation one of these days with Louise McGuane from Chapel Gate, because the two of you think almost identically, although I think she may use a little more profanity in her discussions of the Irish government and the way it regulates whiskies at times. But
yes, I know. She's had a few. Yes, we do sympathise with each other. I mean, the part of it is actually funny. You can make a comedy out of it. It really is that bureaucratic, sort of, nightmare. But I mean, sometimes it's just quite laughable if it wasn't so, sad.
We have a good question here. Go ahead, John.
I just wanted one other thought here on transparency and traceability, because I think it is so vitally important to where I think the world of whiskey is going. Because with more and more, tell me, are you able to hear me, Mark?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
With more and more whiskeys on the market, with more and more distilleries all around the world, with more and more choice.
Yeah.
How are consumers, in particular, more educated, interested consumers, going to make decisions? And I think part of the way they will in future is understanding not just where a whiskey comes from and what it was made of, what style it is, and maybe the reputation of the person putting it in the bottle, but or the company. But people are going to want to know, where is that whiskey from? How was it made? What was it made from? Where exactly was it made? Because all of these aspects of transparency and traceability come back to the intent of the maker. And I think that's what's going to be a differentiating factor for a lot of whiskey fans in over the years. It's not just, you want to understand what the people had in mind, or the company had in mind when they make it. And traceability, transparency gives you information and insight into what they were trying to achieve. So that's why I think why it will be more and more important and more visible. And to your point, Mark, there will need to be some agreements about what it means. But that's complicated political stuff that I don't want to get into.
Let's get to this question from Ben Marnock now. What percentage of flavor comes from the grain? I've always been led to believe it was mostly cask, then from fermentation, then distillation. So, Mark, I'm betting that you're going to tell me it's a lot coming from the grain that we didn't really realize.
Oh, yes. Can I answer that one? John, can I go ahead? Can I answer that, John?
This is your department.
Yeah.
Yes,
I don't think you can say. I think it's really dangerous. This idea that you can just parcel up these percentages and say, well, this percent comes from that, this percent comes from that. You got to understand the basics more. We've all heard that old nugget. 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood, and we've heard that so many times, and it's absolute bollocks. It'd be more honest to say 100% of a whiskey's flavor is influenced by its time in barrel. Yeah, sure. But you've got to have that flavor in the first place. That's in the spirit. And it comes from the barley, which is why we use barley. We don't use, for single malt whiskey, we don't use maize or rye or grapes or apples or pears or strawberries or raspberries. We use barley because it's got the most flavor compounds of any cereal known to man. It is the most complex spirit of all. It's why single malt whiskey is used in blending to bring that whiskey essence, flavor to the mix. So, it's the barley, stupid. That's where it comes from. That's where the flavor is. And if you take, if it's 80% of the flavor comes from the wood, well, the very simple answer to that one is, have you ever tasted neutral spirit aged in oak? it's vile. You've got to have the flavor in the spirit in the first place. And then it's the micro-oxygenation through the oak, the air, influencing those flavor compounds, oxidizing those flavor compounds, the esters and the aldehydes and the fusel oils, changing them over time, which is the maturation and what we associate with maturation. So yes, the wood plays a part. There are additive elements, the lignins and the tannins that come from fresh wood as opposed to tarred as buggery wood. But they're acting on the spirit that's already got the flavors in it from distillation, from fermentation, which have been extracted from the grain during mashing, which come from the barley plant and are therefore influenced by where that barley is grown. So I think the answer to your man is that one glib answer to that is that 100% of the flavor comes from the grain, from the barley. There's other effects that happen to it along the way, but you've got to start with that flavor. If you don't, neutral alcohol, 96.5% pure alcohol, try that for size and see what you think. Try some of that in a barrel. And if you come to Waterford, we'll let you do that because we keep a barrel precisely for that purpose, to show people what a load of nonsense it is to say that 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. I mean, if it did, I mean, what are we all doing with barley? Why are we going to all this effort? Why don't let's just take neutral alcohol, whack it in there, and be done with it? Be a hell of a lot cheaper. Okay, and then you can say, well, finishing is a deliberate process to supplement inadequacies of, I would suggest, I propose inadequacies of maturation of wood policy over years. Or it's also can be used as an equalizer to equalize out things, or it can be used to ameliorate. There's a number of different usages of finishing. I prefer starting with the right wood. That's what I think we should all be aiming at. If you took a really crappy whiskey and then you put it in, for example, fresh sherry barrels straight out of a bodega, it's going to be very dark. It's going to sweeten it. Those are very superficial flavors on top. They are not integral to the spirit. They're like icing on a cake. You got the cake and then you got the icing on top. They're not integral. And I think some of the mistakes that we see out there is it's a bit like people eating cakes. Children eating cake. Eyes bigger than their stomachs. More sweetness, more darkness must be good, and it's not necessarily the case. It's just layers of gunk on top of a cake. I much prefer the integrated flavors, the honest integrated flavors that you get from a full-term maturation. And we did all this at Bruichladdich. When we went through all the good stocks and we ended up with the tarred and the emotional wood that was really past its best, and trying to rejuvenate those barrels by decanting them into fresher wood. And so we got to learn very well what happens with whiskey and wood. And it certainly made me realize that there's no shortcut for having a proper wood policy. And in fact, it's the other way around. It's having a good wood policy accelerates the whiskey maturing profile, because the wood's doing more. It's allowing more oxygenation. There's more things going on. So it allows you to actually bring to market whiskies much younger. So we're talking about venerable old whiskies, which we all love and enjoy. But sometimes they can be there for too long. Sometimes they're only there that age because the wood was so dull in the first place. Whereas if you now look at what's coming with a lot of these, as John was suggesting, these new distilleries. These whiskies are vibrant and fresh at a much earlier age, and I think you'll be surprised when you see our Waterford spirits, which actually were 4 years of age, and I swear to God, you'd think they're 10. So yeah. In a roundabout way, that's the answer to my question, to the question.
We have a good question from David for both of you. Given the innovative approach to each of your businesses, there are a number of similarities between your companies. Aside from the current pandemic and its effect right now on your business, what keeps you up at night, each of you, with respect to the future of your businesses? And John, we'll start with you. What's your worst case scenario? Let's put it that way.
A global pandemic. There are lots of things that keep me up at night. When you're running a small business, there are always ups and downs. I do believe that the interest in whiskey globally is not going to abate anytime soon, pandemic or no pandemic. I mean, and so I have a lot of confidence in where things are going, and the interest that people around the world will continue to have in whiskey. So that allows me to sleep at night. That's the way I'd like to respond to that.
What about stocks? Does that keep you awake at night?
Not usually. I mean, from time to time, you've got issues, you've got shortfalls of things because certain products took off faster than you anticipated, or what have you. At the moment, we're in a good position on stocks, and we've only been filling now for going on 7 years our own, and I'm really excited about that because that's just starting to come on stream, and we're starting to use some of the whiskeys. We picked the distilleries, obviously, and we picked the wood, and that's what I was doing when I came over here 80 days ago. Was visiting some of our American cooperages, and that stuff I'm very excited about. So we're in a good position on stocks.
But you also still have to depend on brokers for a certain amount of stock, right, John?
We've got long-term supply agreements, and so brokers, we do work with brokers from time to time, particularly for some of when it comes to tiny little parcels that are unusual, maybe something that's a blended Scotch whiskey that's been in wood blended for many, many years, and other companies don't want to touch that kind of stuff. But we'll look at it and say, if it's compelling liquid, we don't care about what category it might fit into. We can use that as a component in perhaps limited
stuff like the General, right?
Like, for example, yeah, good example, yeah.
One question I have that I've been pondering for a while now. What's the future going to hold for us in terms of world whiskeys? We've had a couple folks ask about these, and we're starting to see things like the Suntory AO that Beam Suntory put together, where they blended American, Japanese, Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, and Canadian whiskeys together to create a world whiskey to sort of help get past some of the shortages that are ongoing right now in Japan. And I'm wondering, at some point, is a world whiskey worldwide brand viable in this market?
Is it viable in this market? Well, I don't see why not. It depends what and John would tell you. It depends which market you're aiming at, what price point it's going to be, what's it going to taste like. I mean, what you're basically saying is it's an unlimited capability. Because the world is your oyster, so unlimited volume. So it's the potential brand of all mother brands, if that's what you wanted to do. But I can't see why. I don't see what the attraction is. There's no particular attraction to me.
Yeah, when we look at these, think about these things. for me and for us, it comes down to there's got to be a compelling reason, I think, to combine whiskeys from different, just very different places. I'm, like Mark, I'm interested in provenance, and for our business, our provenance just happens to be Scotland. But there'd have to be a compelling reason. There are different traditions in whiskey making around the world, and therefore different, in many cases, very different styles, style traditions around the world. And if you took one style from one place, and I'll make it up, American rye whiskey, and somehow you were able to make a compelling combination with a very distinctive Scotch whiskey, let's say a smoky whiskey. Some people might know where I'm going with that one. If there's a compelling reason to do it, to combine these flavor profiles and these traditions, okay. But if it's for just either for a novelty or just because you want to expand your potential source of supply, that to me isn't compelling. But that's the way I think about it.
Trying to pull up the question here. Mark, I want to go back to the genesis of Waterford, because we had a couple of questions here about the stills. And I want to scroll back because those are the old Inverleven stills that anybody that went to Bruichladdich in the day that you had Duncan's old wellies sticking out of the top of for a while. But we did have a question, and I'm trying to find it here.
There's a sequel to that. But
okay, but let me get the question in here first. They wanted to know if there was any similarity between the spirit from the old Inverleven distillery, where those stills came from, and what you guys were producing at Waterford. And I'm betting that with all the single estate barley projects you've been working on, it's hard to tell. But did you notice any similarities?
No. I mean, there's a lot of bollocks talked about stills. As much bollocks as there is about the water, and stills, in my view, it's a basic spirit weight. It's the weight of the spirit. Tall, narrow stills of the more recent variety. From sort of 1880 onwards. Bunnahabhain, you were talking about, Bruichladdich. They produce literally a more refined spirit because of that high neck, and the difficulty of the vapor rising up and the reflux. Whereas the short, dumpy stills, the older distilleries, the 18th century distilleries, the Lefroigs and where they're basically shoehorning the stills into a byre. So there's, it was the maximum size you could fit into a low-roofed building. They tend to be literally less refined, heavier, oilier spirits. That's the basic difference. The basic difference is it's heavy and powerful versus floral and elegant. Then, as far as Dumbarton, the Inverleven is concerned, I mean, if you saw where these stills were, it was real dungeon of a place. Shoehorned in between these other buildings. It was a vertical distillery. Most are horizontal. This was vertical. It was all stacked up, one above the other, in a narrow sort of afterthought of this awful site. And so when we dismantled and stole all the bits and pieces that we could, we'd been tipped off by a lovely guy who's not, fun enough, is a shareholder in Waterford, called Demolition Dave. And he's one of those guys that goes around blowing up, sort of chimney stacks and, that sort of. And he'd been charged with literally, with the right word, with dismantling the Dumbarton site, this whopping great site on the Clyde River and the bank of the tributary, the Inverleven. And he knew what we were doing at Bruichladdich. We just started there, and he said, look, there's in amongst it, there's this nobody knows, there's this hidden distillery. You've got 2 weeks to take what you want. So we went down there and sent everybody with a spanner and a screwdriver to disconnect whatever we could take. And we took the stills out on a barge and brought them over to Bruichladdich. And in fact, we ran Bruichladdich on the spares from that, Inverleven, for quite a long time. So when it comes to the stills, when we, Remy bought Bruichladdich and we were able to do a deal and keep those stills, had them renovated by Feis Ile, and in fact, they date from 1972, so they're quite old in still terms. But the reality was, I knew that they'd only been used for the best part of 10 years. They sat there for the last 18 years unused, altogether. So there was still life in them. So we have the Waterford Guinness Brewery, 2004 setup. And so introducing the copper, the stills bit was relatively straightforward. So I suppose the answer is the stills decide the weight of the spirit. The rest of it, the mashing, and we've got a hydro mill, as we've got a mash filter, all that gubbins behind it is what produces the initial wash, which is what's going to go into the work that's going to go into the stills. So really, not much is the same, apart from the weight of the spirit.
So what's the story
Does that answer your question?
to the wellies?
So the wellies, the wellies. Well, yes, we did that. Those were Duncan's wellies, dear Duncan, as you know, who passed away sadly. Well, we had when the stills finally arrived at Waterford. With that in mind, the wellies, we filmed some wellies in the neck of the still, but they were attached to my feet at the time, so I was in the neck of the still, and so we filmed this, and it just looked like Duncan's wellies. But there was this sort of a fun moment where I was able to clamber out of the still and sort of walk off. Well, we'll show it to you sometime. It's funnier when you see it.
I can imagine, yeah, and can't let any mention of Duncan go without raising a glass. Wonderful man.
Really yes, exactly, yes.
And you actually dedicated the first bottle of Waterford to Duncan, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, Duncan. I love Duncan. He was. I don't know if you remember that. When we first opened the distillery, and his chief engineer, wonderful Ilach, and a farmer and a crofter, and he filled the first barrel for my son Reynier, who was 6 months old at the time, and it's a photograph I keep close by. And he was really much the heart and soul of that wonderful 18th century machinery, and it was he that basically told me about barley in Ireland. The 40-something years that he was there at Bruichladdich. The best barley he ever saw came from Ireland, and that was a little kernel of an idea that sort of after Remy bought Bruichladdich, and you think, well, that barley, I wonder. And of course, Waterford is literally due south from Islay, 210 miles. If you walk out the door, 210 miles due south, you get your feet wet, but you end up at Waterford. 210 miles climatically is, quite a big thing. We're on the same latitude there as Cambridge. So the growing season is, altogether different. We're sowing barley, 2 months ahead of what they can do up here in Scotland. We're harvesting, at the end of July. Quite often here, it's harvesting doesn't happen until September. And so, the difficulties of the autumn gales and the arrival of the geese and everything, it makes it very difficult. Qualitatively, I don't think there's much in it, but the variety of what we can do in Ireland is just stupendous. It's fantastic. There's 15 different soil types that we can play with. We 40 farms all around the centre and southeast of the country. You're asking the previous question is what worries you at night. Well, funny enough, it's the growing season of the barley worries us. 2018 with the beast from the east produced a very difficult harvest for us down there in Ireland. And it resulted in very high nitrate levels, which during the malting process makes it very difficult. The yields suffer badly. The gelatization is difficult. It means it's hard work to actually get the best out of it. 219 harvest was an absolute dream. 220 harvest started brilliantly. We've now had a drought for the last 2 months. That's going to possibly cause nitrate issues unless the growing season evens out between now and harvest time. Those are the things, because inevitably for us, putting all our eggs in the barley basket, if yields are low, well, we're still distilling, and we're still paying. The barley price goes up, it goes down. The yields of alcohol go down. In 2018 harvest, we were paying higher prices for lower yields. Go figure. The liter price for alcohol. It was a real pain. That's the reality of doing what we do. Last year, instead of doing 1 million liters, which is our goal, we ended up doing barely 900,000. We still paid for 1 million liters, but didn't get it. So that's the reality of doing. It's not all fun and games doing what we do. There's a price that goes with it.
John, a quick question for you now, just to clarify some things, because there's been a discussion in the chat room about the relationship between Dewar's/Bacardi and Compass Box. And I think I know the story from when you told it to me before, but I'd like you to sort of clarify that just for folks who are wondering just what input the folks at Dewar's and Bacardi have into Compass Box. If I remember correctly, it was one of your investors that sold them their shares. It wasn't them buying a stake in the company.
Yeah, that's right. They've been a minority shareholder for 6 years now, and we took them on board because of whiskey supply. But they have nothing to do with the running of the business. We're autonomous, have been from the very beginning. But what happened is one of our longtime shareholders offered to sell them his shares and to help us out, really. And in exchange, we other shareholders agreed to that, because with that exchange of equity came a long-term supply agreement, which has helped us tremendously. To the question earlier about, do we worry about stock? Well, other companies our size worry about stock all the time. We're in a very fortunate position that we've got a partner in the business that has helped us out with that for quite some time. One of the things that some people don't always realize is that behind every business, behind every small business in particular, there are shareholders. It's the unusual situation when a company founder founds a business and comes with all the money. Usually there are other people or businesses behind them that are bringing money or other expertise. And so it's part and parcel of the way business is. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And we were talking about blending worldwide whiskeys. Let's talk about the blend you did a year or two ago with Calvados. And that's only 2 spirits, but it was similar to something we had discussed. Is And as Greg points out, it was 2 spirits, not wines, so no automatic hangover. And I really liked that blend.
Can't speak to the hangover part, but yeah, my point earlier. We'll do something that's outside of the outside the status quo or the rule book, if it creates something compelling to drink. And for many years, I'd been blending, experimenting, because I've loved Calvados for so as long as I loved whiskey. And there was a night when Amy, my wife, made a tarte tatin, which is classic, sort of French apple dish. And instead of reaching for the bottle of Calvados, I reached for a bottle of Compass Box Spice Tree, and it was beautiful. And then I couldn't help, thinking eventually, well, what if I combined the Calvados and the Spice Tree? And that style of Scotch whiskey worked really well with Calvados. And finally, after several years of sharing it as a little with visitors and friends and so forth in the blending room and at home, we decided to just do it. And so we were introduced to, by Thierry Benatat to Guillaume Drouin at Domaine, and he was really excited about distiller, Calvados maker, and we came out with Affinity, which is lovely, perfect, beautiful, extraordinary with tarte tatin.
I tried it at the Whisky Show at your master class the year before you went. I was going, you need to bottle that sucker because it's good. Now, Graham Fraser has asked,
right, yeah,
so I want to get this question in. What direction do you see Compass Box going in the future, John? And go ahead and please finish what you were going to say beforehand.
Well, I was just saying that I remember when you tasted a very early version of what became Affinity. That's right. Direction we're going in the future. I continue to go up, I hope, is the direction. We make a lot of whiskeys. Our portfolio, I admit, is broad and it's unusual. It's not a classic sort of marketing approach to building a brand, but that's not what I set out to do, is create a classic marketing brand. I set out to create a brand that would help make the world of Scotch whiskey a more interesting place, and in turn make people like Graham's drinking lives that little bit more interesting. So you can continue to expect to see us releasing more limited things, really getting behind the core whiskeys which we create, which we make month in, month out, Artist Blend, Glasgow Blend, Peat Monster, things like that. But what I'm really excited about in the coming 5 or so years is when the whiskeys that we've laid down, and as I said, we only started laying down our own 7 years ago, as those start to reach a level of maturity where we can use them in core products or new products. That's exciting to me. Because we're pretty painstaking in the wood that we choose and in the distilleries that we source from, and that'll be a lot of fun in the years to come.
We had a comment a few minutes ago from Dave Kuhn. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when Reynier and McEwen were in some heated debates back in the day. Mark, I know you still live down the road from Bruichladdich. How often do you get to see Jim?
That's the picture. That's the picture of Duncan
and Rory,
and me and Rory. My wife in the background. That's Duncan. That's the first barrel that we filled in April or May 2001. There you go, dear old Duncan. Sorry, what was the question?
So how often do you run across Jim? Since I know you live down the road still from the distillery.
I haven't. Well, our paths rarely cross. He's traveling around the world doing all sorts of bits and pieces. I'm going to Waterford, Edinburgh, Grenada, because as you know, I've got I'm building. We're just completing in the next sort of 3 weeks a sugarcane distillery out there where we're going to take the same terroir project to rum. And that's been an absolutely roller coaster of a ride. It really has been, ups and downs out there. But I think it will be a fantastic landmark. I'll be really pleased when we finally get to turn the taps on that one. And that should be sometime in July. So you'll hear more about it, nearer the time. And we won't need to wait quite so long for the maturation because of the speed of Caribbean maturation. So that's what I've been doing. So that's where I'm going. I'm commuting between Islay, Edinburgh, Waterford, and Grenada. Or at least I was until COVID. I barely see Simon Coughlin. I barely see. I haven't seen Jim for years.
Well, let's bring Billy and David back in, and just to close things out, guys, you've been sitting here watching this, and anything else you wanted to throw in? Any questions that you guys might have, or any comments sitting there listening to all this?
I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's that the whole wood versus spirit versus other influences, barley, etc. is certainly one that gets a lot of airtime in Australia. And I know distilleries like Reynier, when Billy Walker was there, they used to aim for a 60-40 ratio, ideally. But I get reminded of a quote that Warren Buffett uses in relation to the stock market, but I use in relation to whiskies, that it's only when the tide goes out do you realize who's been swimming without his shorts. That doesn't matter how good you think your casks are. It's the spirit that goes into it that can determine how good the whiskey is.
Very good phrase. Yes.
Billy,
I'm fascinated by the terroir thing. As the ex-geneticist in me looks at it from a very different perspective in terms of the old landrace varieties of barley and all the different crops and what that brings to a very industrialized process, and how delicate the system has to be to pick up that variation as you move through was essentially a very complex and long-term process to get to that endpoint. It's a huge area with so many avenues that are still to be explored. We know so little about the overall individual steps of this whole process. We're just scratching the surface in so many ways.
Well, guys,
I think you're right there. It's an interesting point, because if you don't look, you won't find. And I think the industry has been very happy not looking, just not wanting to bother with that.
It was in
and I think now we're all creating interest in whiskey, and people are naturally asking questions like, what happens next, and what about this, what about that. So I think being able to put that into practice is good for everybody.
It's that little bit of playing around. The status quo is there, where everybody's comfortable and everybody knows what they're expecting, and there's that little bit of wriggle room. But it's playing around the periphery where the new innovations are going to come from, and we're going to take off in those different directions by investigating them and playing and adapting them to what we already know and how we perceive where we want to be in the individual distilleries.
John, any final thoughts from you?
From me, can I just mention that
Could you have,
in light of what's going on these days, we've tried at our business to do our small role in helping the hospitality industry. I think it's worth pointing out that especially for a business like ours, where such a large percentage of our sales go through the great bars and restaurants of the world, all of which are closed pretty much at the moment. If people want to see how we're trying to support the individuals who have been affected by these businesses being shut down by the governments around the world, take a look at our social media feeds. Take a look at Facebook or Instagram, or our feeds there. We've got an effort where people can buy some lovely T-shirts and things, that all the proceeds of which go to help support charities that are direct support.
Can you come closer to the microphone? I can't hear a word you're saying.
John, we need you to hold that microphone back up.
Sorry, I was just making the point that the hospitality industry is in need, and we are doing what we can in our small way to help them. And people can check out our Facebook and Instagram feeds for more information on our efforts, and you can buy some cool T-shirts with a lovely message. With that message, and all the proceeds are going to charities supporting hospitality workers in need. That's the one. I just wanted to close with that. That's the elephant in the room. Obviously, is what's going on around us right now, around the world, and we're trying to do our part. And I know everybody's doing their own thing. That's our thing. So help us out if we can, and help out hospitality workers.
And we've already gotten thank yous from Dave Kuhn and Dominic Venegas, who really appreciate that. And on behalf of everybody in the hospitality industry, I think it's a great thing. we've had a lot of folks doing a lot of good stuff to help out, but there's still a great need, and there will be for a long time to come. Gentlemen, this has been fun. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Billy, David, thank you for sitting so patiently. I didn't expect you guys to hang around till the end. You guys could have left at any time, but thank you for sticking around with us. Mark Reynier, John Glaser, thank you guys as well.
Pleasure.
This has been fun. I hope we've answered all the
Thank
questions
you.
that everybody has. And I think it's been a great discussion. So if you guys will hang on for a second here, let me sort of finish things up. That's it for the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. Don't forget to join us on Friday for our happy hour show, Friday at 5 p.m. New York time. It's 10 p.m. London time, 2100 GMT. We have another panel of whiskey writers and editors joining us on Friday night. The panel includes Rob Allinson from Whiskey Magazine, Sergio Florides of Irish Whiskey Magazine, and Gavin Smith, who's written a whole bunch of books and has written for pretty much every whiskey magazine and publication out there. They'll be joining us on the panel Friday night at 5 o'clock. And don't forget, we'll have a new episode of the WhiskyCast podcast up this weekend. You can also listen to this week's show with Stephen Teeling of Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin. They reopened their gift shop last week after 10 weeks of closing because of the COVID lockdowns. They were allowed to reopen their distillery shop and cafe. No tastings or tours yet, but we had a good chat with Stephen about the whole process of getting that open and what it's meant to them to be able to get their place open. That's it for the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. We always welcome your comments. You can email us at comments@whiskycast.com, and we'll see you on Friday night. Until then, I'm Mark Gillespie. Sláinte. Good night, everyone.
Good night.